I want to take the time to thank all our presenters. At this point, I don't see any questions in the question box. Judy, is it okay if I ask a few of each presenter?
You may, Eric. And in addition, I have a question as well. So you go first.
Let me jump back to Aaron. I have a question for Aaron. You talked about the packaging of treatments by geographic regions, and you had an example in your presentation. Is that automatically done in the software, or is that a manual and adjust process done by the user at the end of the analysis?
Great question. Thanks, Eric. This is actually an automated process. It's actually outside the software. It takes the software output, and then we have a post-process analysis that we run to package those things up based on combining projects around highest BC project recommendations. And so it'll join across years and treatment alternatives as best it can. But the idea is like anything, you're going to try to get to your like 80 to 90% solution, and then you're going to have to put eyes on it to get it across the finish line completely. Just trying to simplify that process a bit.
Yeah, I thought that was really impressive. So that's a piece of software that you developed outside of the pavement management system.
Yeah, it's more just a procedure that works with it. Yep.
Another question about your decision trees, and you had a couple decision trees in your presentation. New Hampshire's currently in the development stage of revamping our pavement management system. So we're developing decision trees, and one of the things we added was the age of the pavement. In your experience, how important is that age component in the decision tree, and how does it affect is it a major effector of your output?
Oh yeah, very, very important. I focused on the two main drivers for pavement preservation, condition data and construction history data. And really construction history data, especially in a time now where it can be somewhat difficult for automated data collection to pick up surface defects like oxidation, weathering, raveling type distresses. If you're doing that, you need a stand-in for those surface conditions that typically are when you want to apply those preservation treatments, before you get any heavy cracking. So in those cases, having pavement age allows you to then trigger based on a time basis, as almost kind of like, think of it as like not just a stand-in, but like a catch-all. Like if just in case you fall below any other condition rules, that data can kind of stand in.
No, that's good, Aaron. That kind of that's where we're at too, and looking at our decision trees and realizing how much of age plays a role in that, and certainly having a good, solid construction and maintenance history really feeds into that.
Absolutely.
So I don't have any questions for Chris because he had a pre-recorded session, but I do have a couple for Todd. Todd, in your presentation, you mentioned something about an option to turn roads, paved roads back to gravel. Do you have I've been approached by some of the municipalities in New Hampshire about when to do that. Do you have a decision tree, or do you have threshold values that you look at for that?
We typically would consider that when the ADT or the daily traffic drops below around 250. Once it gets below that level, it's kind of also on the flip side. That's also when we start looking at aggregate roads for paving. So it's kind of the reverse. So we look at, if we have a road that gets new development or some kind of trip generator starts creating more traffic, and we start getting up around 250 vehicles a day, based on our maintenance costs for an aggregate road, it starts tipping back towards it's more cost effective to maintain it as a paved road. So that's kind of our trigger point, is 250 vehicles a day.
Okay, so it's a purely ADT and traffic level type decision.
Right, so the ADT kind of generates the cost to maintain. So it's a cost and an ADT, but usually the ADT is the indicator.
In your presentation, I was intrigued that some of the universities have added courses. Can you elaborate on some of those courses that have been added, and how have they been receptive by students, if you have a sense of that?
Unfortunately, I don't have much detail about that. Dr. Ashley Buss at Iowa State was the professor teaching those courses, and I believe it was just pavement preservation, basically kind of like a a 101, from the basics to the most detailed. But I don't have the actual itinerary or anything or syllabus for the class. But I think it was, from what she told me initially, it was just kind of a basic class in pavement preservation. So I was just happy to hear that they were starting to include pavement preservation as a class instead of just being a portion of, say, asphalt concrete design or something like that. So
I think that's great, especially as things progress in federal highway, and the focus becomes pavement preservation and maintaining what we have. Asset management and teaching it at the collegiate level is going to become more and more important to gain that interest from the students. So they're willing to move into this field, ever-growing field. Moving on to Austin. Austin, you have a pretty large network of 2,529 miles. You mentioned something about a 5-year forecast. So I assume that's like a 5-year paving program. We maintain a 3-year paving program at New Hampshire DOT. How fluid is that 5-year forecast? Does it change much? So if I'm John Q. Public and I go to your website and I see on there that my road's going to be paved at year 5, how reliable is that indicator? Does it change a lot?
The way we describe our 5-year forecast is year 1 is basically our scheduled work plan that's locked in. Those projects will get done. And then, of course, each year, especially towards the end of the fiscal year, we have either add-ins or subtractions from that work plan. And based on what we do there, you start to see the effects of that probably, I'd say, in year 4 and maybe year 5. When we relay the information to the public and even the chain of command, we talk about years 2 through 5 as being forecasted. That way everybody's clear that those segments aren't locked in. But right now, I would say for the most part, something like 95% of what we're forecasting will get rolled over into the updated work plan. And then maybe year 5, the outer year, as it goes to year 4, there are some changes to what we forecasted the year prior. But for the most part, what we've seen since 2018, which of course we haven't made it through a full 5-year cycle yet, but for the most part, we're rolling into what we forecasted pretty good.
That's good, Austin. I would say on our 3-year paving program, it changes quite a bit. We have that first year being locked in, but the future 2 years that we have, there's definitely some fluidity there because, as you know, some roads may decline more rapidly than others. So something might become a higher priority. So we shift it from the 3rd year to the 2nd year and maybe push something out. But it sounds like you're doing pretty well with that 5-year forecast. I had another question for you, Austin. You talked about an increase in your funding, and as we know, funding increases are hard to come by and hard to prove. What kinds of tools and information did you use to help push that along and get that approved?
That really came about when my predecessor was running the program, and she basically used the information I showed today. When we got the license for Agile and started to set up Agile assets and take a look at what we had been doing in the past and what it would look like in the future if we continued to underfund our program, our condition of the network was going to drop off significantly. So these visual aids that I showed today were kind of straight to the point of what the condition network would look like and how many more miles we could treat by adding preservation and increasing that budget. And I think with our progress since 2018, we're actually discussing a significantly higher budget increase into the fiscal years ahead.
Wow, that's really great. So the success of your program is helping you justify future increases. That's exactly where you want to be as a practitioner. You want to be in the driver's seat, not on the peripheral, looking in. It looks like Richard Turner had to step away. I did have some questions for him, but in the interim, it looks like we have a couple questions now in our question box. So I'll attempt to go through those. I have a question. I believe this is for you, Aaron. Question about your pavement management system and whether age is functional age, structural age, or both.
The age itself is actually in that scenario. What you're seeing in that graphic was just derived directly from the construction history data from the data set. So if they applied a major rehabilitation to that roadway, that it resets some of the rules in there, like what pavement age will go back to 0. The last treatment will be applied would have been a major rehab. And so it resets a number of kind of trigger points in the system to then determine what would happen next in future years of the analysis. If the question is more about what happens when a functional or structural treatment applies, those kinds of rules actually applied more to the treatment itself. So it might improve the scores by a certain amount, might reset a model for the future analysis, that sort of thing. But in terms of just purely looking at construction history, we're just looking at mostly how it readjusts values of age and treatment timing.
I have another 2 questions, and it looks like they're related, so I'm going to put them together and combine them. For a low budget city just ready to move up from spreadsheets, which software, 1 for collection and 2 for projections optimization is cheapest and easy to use by a 3-person city engineer's office? So we have a couple people that have implemented agile assets and their solution here. So would one of you gentlemen like to take that?
I can just say that if your agency's small enough, you have to weigh the kind of the costs and benefits of it. And that's a really loaded question. I think there's a lot of considerations that need to be put into place there. What kind of data you're going to collect, how you're going to collect it, what you intend to do with it. And I think, what would be well received internally, like how you'd be able to use that information or use that system. There's quite a lot to unpack in that question.
Aaron, in your implementations that you've done, have you had small communities like that use like windshield survey and manual survey versus an expensive, data fully automated data collection vehicle?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, the agencies span everything from just giving it just a basic score 1 through 5, all the way up through fully automated crack detection and all the other kind of goodies that go along with automated data collection. Again, it really comes back to what your needs are. And an agency that's only going to have, say, 50 miles of roadway, their needs are significantly different than one that has 2,500 miles of roadway. And you need to kind of weigh those options.
Yeah, very good. That's the same message that I deliver too, is it doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar van that collects your data. You can keep it simple and still implement a pavement management system.
Yeah, your best bet is just to get started and start to document the process as best you can. And as soon as you start getting some of those your ducks in a row, you'll start to realize where you are pretty quickly.
I would offer one comment too, is it might be beneficial to try and establish what you can budget for your initial program out of the gate, and then decide what level of data collection or planning or design you're going to go into.
Thanks, Aaron, for jumping in there. I have another question in the question box. As a city employee who has to handle political districts, should I shape my preservation plan for equal treatment around the 3 districts each year, or come up with a plan and work on educating the district chair people to trust the system, ensuring that their roads will eventually be taken care of? A loaded question. How about Austin? Can you have a large network with probably different regions? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I'm sorry, Eric, could you repeat some of that? I didn't catch all of the punchline there of the question.
Sure, Austin. As a city employee who has to handle political districts, should I shape my pavement preservation plan for equal treatment around the 3 districts each year, or come up with a plan and work on educating the district chair people to trust the system? So do I try to put that preservation equally around the network and in the individual regions, or does it matter that it's lopsided?
Well, I've found that we do take a look at that and kind of make sure that so the county's split up into 5 different maintenance areas, and we try to make sure that there's somewhat of an even distribution of preservation treatments going across each of those 5. And what I've found, if there is an imbalance there, the public will also take note of that rather quickly, and I think the complaints can roll in significantly. So whether you're doing that through your management software or not, I think it's definitely important to take a look at how your preservation program is mapped out across your districts.
Very good, Austin. Thanks for that insight. Judy, you had mentioned that you had a couple questions. I don't see any more in the question box.
Actually, the questions that I had have been asked and answered. I would like to make a little comment on that last question, though, about the political districts and how do you divide up the money. And I'm just going to offer one option that might help. It may not, but it might help. North Carolina, where I retired from, has a very large local road network that is state maintained. So I had to deal with a lot of local roads. I just want to mention that one approach that had been used in some areas of North Carolina was to have a 1 or 2 crews who would be out doing crack sealing the year in advance of placement of the preservation treatments. And so the people in the areas where they were doing the crack sealing knew that the following year they would be getting the more robust treatments. And so it spreads the allocation around. It provides a method to do that in a way that actually can improve the performance of those treatments the following year. Just a comment.
Yeah, thank you for that, Judy. And once again, I don't see any more questions, so I do want to take the opportunity to thanks again to all our presenters. Thanks to our conference session, case study, and logo sponsors. And finally, thank everyone for attending. I hope you found the conference to be as informative and interesting as I did. This concludes session 9. Judy, I'd like to turn it over to you for any closing conference comments.
I could not be more pleased with this session. It was maybe not the biggest attendance we've had, but we had excellent presentations and really good insight into the local agency practices. So thank you all for attending. I hope you attended several sessions in the conference and that you learned enough to make it worth the time you expended.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.